Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for joining today. It's a real pleasure to see so many people here and to be able to present this work, which is very much a team effort. So there are 14 nationally determined contributions that have been included in the analysis to date, and this represents the climate commitments of 66 countries because the EU27 submits a single joint NDC, and these are ranked in a bar chart, which I'll show a bit later. And in addition, we also have 14 countries that also have their own individual scorecards, and this is either because a country was particularly politically significant in some way, or because the health community is especially strong and might be able to take this work forward. And of course, we also wanted to maintain some sort of regional balance. We'll continue analysing nationally determined contributions as more of them become available, and there'll be a map in the coming weeks, as well as regular updates of the bar chart and scorecards that I'll be showing later on this call. As Jenny has already said, we are standing on the shoulders of giants of others that have done such valuable work in this area, the World Health Organization and Lancet Countdown, to name just a few. But I really want to give special thanks to Iris, Omnia, Laura, Juliet, Blanca and Kim, who have worked so hard in analysing the NDCs as part of this initiative. So huge thanks to them. To talk briefly about the methods that we use, there was an analytical framework that was developed in consultation with those that have worked on this previously, and all those that I've just mentioned, GCHA partners and collaborators in our network who have previously worked on inclusion of health in the nationally determined contributions. And there were 2 rounds of analysis for every NDC that you'll see presented today. And where there was any difference in score between the 2 analysts, the 2 analysts discussed this discrepancy and agreed on a final score that would then be presented in the bar chart and the other materials. So for each country, there are 2 components to the way that we analyse them. There's first of all a score out of 15 that's based on 5 categories with 3 points available for each. For health impacts, we were mentioned in the number of times that various health impacts are mentioned, and also whether these were measured or quantified in some way. In terms of health in adaptation, this was really to do with the level of detail and focus on health in adaptation measures. So whether there was just an acknowledgement of the need for adaptation in health, whether there'd been a vulnerability assessment done, whether health featured as part of a wider adaptation plan, or finally whether there was a standalone health adaptation plan, or if there was a large amount of detail on health in adaptation in the NDC, that was also awarded a high number of points. Health co-benefits, so as Jenny has already mentioned, especially interested here in the benefits to health in terms of air quality, healthier diets, and improved physical activity due to interventions in the energy, food and agriculture and transport sectors. But in addition to this, we also considered mentions of nature-based solutions or benefits for SDG 3. If these weren't specifically focused on health adaptation, we assumed that they referred to health co-benefits, so the point was still awarded and in this category. And as well as mention of any of those, we were also interested in whether, again, they were measured or quantified in some way. For economics and finance, we were especially lenient with the scoring here because we wanted to differentiate between the countries that made some sort of acknowledgement of the costs or economic opportunities of the links between health and climate change. This was a relatively small number of countries, so there wasn't always a specific financial sum associated with this where points were awarded. But overall, we awarded points where there was either reference to the cost of the health impacts of climate change or the level of investment needed for, say, adaptation measures, or the returns on investment that might be yielded by co-benefit solutions. And then finally, there were bonus points that were available for overall detail and integration of health in the NDC, whether there was a paragraph that had lots of mentions of health, whether health featured specifically in the title of that paragraph, and whether health might have been mentioned in a particularly notable way. Climate ambition was also noticed where data on projected temperature rise was available. This is provided by Climate Action Tracker. It's not included in the total score because it wasn't in the score out of 15 because it's not available for all countries, but this actually provides a useful opportunity to compare and contrast between countries. For those that are familiar with Climate Action Tracker, it's just worth noting that there is Climate Action Tracker is still analysing lots of the NDCs that have come out in this round. So lots of the 2015, 2016 NDCs have a temperature rating for a given country, but this might not yet have been awarded for the 2020, 2021 NDC. to look at some particular countries. First of all, just to explain the layout of the scorecards. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the 5 categories that we were interested in the score that's available out of each of them. And then the total score out of 15 is visible at the bottom on the left. And then also where it's available, the climate ambition rating according to Climate Action Tracker on the left, indicated by the thermometer. On the right, sorry, indicated by the thermometer in the middle level of the page. So for Costa Rica received full marks for all of the 5 categories that we're interested in, with the exception of economics and finance, and its NDC is also aligned with the Paris Agreement. In terms of impacts, Costa Rica highlights the links between health, between climate change and vector-borne diseases, zoonoses and food security and nutrition, and it also commits to monitoring these impacts, so that got at the 3rd point for health impacts. Adaptation considerations for health are also referred to in detail in the NDC. In terms of co-benefits, Costa Rica notes the benefit of specific and time-bound mitigation targets in the energy and transport sectors. There's, for example, a specific goal for black carbon, and that's linked to health. Health also features in the financing section of the NDC, and in addition to a dedicated section on health, Costa Rica was also awarded a 3rd bonus point for consistent integration and consideration of health throughout its entire NDC. This is in contrast to the European Union, which makes only 1 reference to health, and this is in relation to the co-benefits of nature-based solutions. Also worth noting, that Climate Action Tracker has not yet produced a temperature rating for the updated EU NDC. To move on to Kenya and the US, Kenya's NDC makes general mention of vulnerability to health and also to loss of life due to flooding, and it also refers to famine. It mentions the number of people left without food and water during a period of drought from 2014 to 2018. So this is where the 3rd point for health impact is awarded, and it also includes a target to measure the incidence of malaria and other vector-borne diseases. The health sector and water and sanitation feature in the adaptation section of the NDC, together with drought and flood management, which I mentioned earlier in the NDC as being closely related to health and having an impact on it, which is why points are awarded there, whereas they wouldn't have been if that health link wasn't made. Kenya's NDC is also aligned with the Paris Agreement, according to Climate Action Tracker. Additional international financing may, of course, increase the feasibility of additional focus on health co-benefits. And then for the US, the US's NDC recognises climate change as an existential threat, which we're interpreting as a clear reference to health impacts, and acknowledges that this demands bold action. Adaptation measures are actually in the building sector in this instance, and are described as protecting health. Health co-benefits are referred to in sections of the NDC dedicated to energy and transport, and then they're also quantified with a mention of the number of lives that could be saved through improved air quality. A point was also awarded in the economics and finance category, and for the fairly notable statement that climate change inaction far outweighs the cost of action. So this is an example of where there isn't a specific financial sum referred to, but there is that clear acknowledgement of costs of climate change. More broadly, the NDC also makes several mentions of equity. The US NDC, like the EU NDC, and the latest one, hasn't been analysed by Climate Action Tracker, so we could not include the level of climate ambition here. This is now the bar chart that allows some sort of comparison between countries. You can see that the countries with the highest score are Costa Rica, with its 13 out of 15, the highest of all the scores that of the NDCs that were analysed in this round, but also closely followed by Laos, Senegal, Argentina, Lebanon, Papua New Guinea and Rwanda. The fact that these low and middle income countries tend to be those which are already experiencing the health impacts of climate change, they're already very felt. This may explain why they've been integrated into the NDC. By contrast, down the bottom of the bar chart, you can see it's mainly high-income countries, with the exception of Brazil. So those high-income countries are Australia, New Zealand, Iceland and Norway, and they each score 0. And it's really important here to mention that we only analyse the NDC itself, and there are lots of particularly high-income countries that submit separate adaptation communications, so they may have gained up to 3 more additional points if they had particularly detailed health measures included in those adaptation communications, or indeed other adaptation plans at the national level. It's also interesting to look at the mismatch sometimes between the health score and the level of climate ambition. So for the UAE, Vietnam, Mexico, Argentina and Chile, there is substantial recognition of the health impacts, but this really isn't reflected in the level of climate ambition. By nature, everything that's in the NDC, or the vast majority, of what's in the NDCs are commitments rather than records of ongoing work. And while commitments are an essential step towards implementation, action and progress, without that implementation, commitments themselves have very little meaning. So it's absolutely essential that there is political will to be backing implementation of these commitments, but also economic provision to see them through. And it's therefore quite notable that economics and finance was generally the lowest scoring category throughout this analysis. In terms of what happens between now and COP and beyond, so countries that are responsible for approximately half of global emissions are yet to submit NDCs in this round. We'd be really grateful to everyone on this webinar if you wanted to tailor and amplify messaging, and we are more than happy to discuss how to do this. But these very broadly are 4 categories of messaging that might work. So countries that are yet to submit their NDCs should be maximising ambition and integrating health considerations. Countries with ambitious NDCs and with limited attention to health should be prioritising co-benefit policies when implementing and deciding which policies will be used to implement to progress towards those ambitious targets. Lots of countries do already have such co-benefit policies in place, and these can really be promoted as leaders and celebrated. In some countries, there is scope for an updated NDC prior to COP. Examples of this are South Korea and New Zealand, although there are also others, even though they've already submitted an NDC for this round. And then finally, all countries should, of course, be raising ambition and increasing attention to health in future rounds. That's everything from me. Thank you ever so much for listening, and looking forward to any opportunities to work together in the coming months.